The abandoned man abreast hoarsely, "Don't talk, aloof listen." Officer Rachel Taus froze. She had aloof stepped out of her convoying car aback the ragged figure aptitude adjoin a brick bank bent her attention. At aboriginal glance, he looked like endless added abandoned souls of the city. Bedraggled clothes, unkempt beard, connected circuitous hair dripping from the drizzle. But his eyes austere with urgency. At his side, a loyal mutt growled, staring attentively into the colligiosity of the alley. Rachel's instincts screamed danger, but her duke hesitated on her holster. Something about his accent fabricated her pause. Rachel advised him for a moment longer. He didn't flinch, didn't blunder like addition intoxicated. His voice, though rough, agitated the weight of addition who had apparent too much. "Behind you," he whispered again. She glanced over her except to join the aphotic alley. Trash cans lined the wall, decrepit baptise from the rain, but annihilation seemed unusual. Still, her gut tightened. The dog's bark deepened, its hackles raised. Rachel's training told her to assurance both instincts and signals, and both were screaming at her now. The man boring aloft a bedraggled hand, pointing adjoin the shadows. "He's been cat and mouse there," he said quietly, aperture trembling. "Watched you drive up. I saw him chase you." Rachel's beating quickened. She pressed her aback adjoin the car, duke abutting on her weapon, eyes absorption at the alley's edge. The dribble angry heavier, abacus restriction to the moment. Rachel realized she was bent in the average of two worlds. A uniformed protector of the law and a ragged man association dismissed, admonishing her of article unseen. She whispered sharply, "Who's there?" Her articulation echoed off the wet brick walls. No answer came, abandoned the crawl of baptise from the rooftops. Rachel's breathing slowed as she focused on every sound. Suddenly, a abreast affray bankrupt the silence, shoes abrasion adjoin pavement, quick and nervous. Her muscles tensed. The abandoned man's dog barked once, articulate and fierce, affairs at the moment. Rachel aerial her flashlight and aimed it adjoin the alley. The beam slicing through the rain like a blade. A amount anchored from the darkness. Rachel reacted instantly, Duke snapping to her gun, but the abandoned man's hoarse voice cut through the chaos. "Don't shoot. He's got a knife." The drifter lunged forward, a glint of metal communicable the dim streetlight. Rachel sidestepped, pulling her weapon free, affection hammering. The dog snarled, leaping forward, teeth flashing. For a brief second, time seemed to slow. Rachel had to decide. Pull the activate or assurance the warning. That atom of averseness was enough for the action to absolutely begin. The drifter stumbled, but didn't stop. He lunged closer, knife aloft high. Rachel dodged backward, her bottom slipping slightly on the wet ground. The abandoned man, afterwards a additional thought, pushed himself forward, intercepting the attacker, his ragged anatomy comatose into the knife-wielding figure, both aerobatics into the puddles on the ground. Rachel froze, her gun raised, borderline whether to shoot. The dog barked an airtight at the assailant, affairs adored seconds. Rain caked bottomward heavier, assimilation them all, turning the action into an anarchic becloud of movements and shadows. Rachel shouted, "Get off him," but the abandoned man grunted, captivation the stranger's arm back with all his strength. The knife bargain inches from his face, but he didn't let go. Rachel circled quickly, aiming her gun, aggravating to acquisition a bright attempt without hitting her abrupt ally. Her animation came in articulate bursts, adrenaline surging. Finally, with a loud crack, she accursed one admonishing attempt into the air. The sound burst the night. The antagonist flinched, giving the abandoned man just enough advantage to bend the knife chargeless and bung it aside. The knife skittered across the wet pavement, landing abreast Rachel's boots. She anon kicked it away, far out of reach. The antagonist struggled berserk below the homeless man's grip, but he was weakening. Rachel confused closer, snapping her cuffs from her belt. With one abrupt motion, she affianced the man's arm and clamped the metal tight. The complete of the bang echoed like a final punctuation. The man growled blame below his breath, but the action was over. Rachel exhaled, trembling slightly, still processing the crisis she had about avoided. Aback it was done, she angry to the abandoned man. His chest heaved with exhaustion, hair bashed to his face from the rain. His dog sat absolutely at his side again, appendage wagging faintly as if proud. Rachel stared at him, disturbing to find words. She began, but stopped. For already in her career, she accomplished her life had been adored not by her training, not by backup, but by addition society dismissed as worthless, addition who had annihilation yet risked everything. The weight of that adeptness apprenticed heavily on her heart. Rachel holstered her weapon slowly, her eyes never leaving him. You could accept being killed, she said quietly. The man shrugged, wiping rain and clay from his forehead. So could you, he rasped. There was no pride in his voice, no arrogance, abandoned a simple truth. His dog nudged his leg as if reminding him of the band they aggregate in surviving another night. Rachel aback acquainted a agony of answerability for the suspicion she had felt aback she Aboriginal saw him. She had been amiss and she knew it. She gestured toward her car, cerebration he adeptness charge help, maybe like a hospital. But the man shook his head. No hospitals, he said firmly. His eyes flickered with something fear, conceivably shame. Rachel hesitated, broken amid assignment and respect. She capital to press, but article in his accent told her not to. Instead, she offered him a absolute from her convoying car. He accustomed it silently, draping it over his blood-soaked shoulders. The dog coiled up adjoin his side, both of them algidity from the cold. Rachel below bottom-ward to his level, believe him more closely. Below the clay and weariness, she could see intelligence in his gaze. His words beforehand replayed in her mind. Sharp, urgent, activity-saving. She accomplished he wasn't aloof addition abandoned man. He had a story, one hidden beneath layers of affliction and survival. She wondered how addition like him concluded up here on these streets with annihilation but a dog to alarm family. The catechism weighed on her, but she didn't ask. Not yet. Instead, Rachel said softly, "Thank you." 2 words, but abundant with sincerity. The man looked at her for a long moment, as admitting barometer her honesty. Finally, he nodded, his lips curving into the faintest adumbration of a smile. His dog baffled his hand, breaking the tension. For the Aboriginal time that night, Rachel accustomed herself to feel relief. She had been saved, not by her brand or her gun, but by the altruism of someone no one abroad would notice. She radioed for backup, her articulation steady again. Within minutes, aflame lights abounding the street. Officers caked in, securing the doubtable and demography statements. Some glanced abnormally at the abandoned man, but Rachel shut bottom-ward any comments with a look. She owed him more than anyone could understand. Aback one administrator asked who had chock-full the attacker. Rachel artlessly replied, he did. The blackout that followed was heavy, abounding with atheism and a adumbration of respect. The abandoned man shifted uncomfortably below their gazes. He wasn't gluttonous praise. He capital to disappear aback into the colligiosity area he had appear from. Rachel sensed it. Before he could blooper away, she chock-full him. Wait, she said, dispatch closer. What's your name? The man hesitated, afresh answered in a whisper. David. It was simple, about fragile, like a accuracy he hadn't announced in years. Rachel repeated it softly, committing it to memory. David, the man who had adored her life. As the arena eased, Rachel offered him a ride about warm. He declined again, insisting he was accomplished area he was. She didn't push, but she did leave him with aliment from her trunk, packaged commons she usually agitated for long shifts. David accustomed it quietly, his dog wagging its appendage at the sight. Rachel watched as he aloof into the shadows, absolute captivated tight, dog at his side. She acquainted an anguish in her chest, animate she adeptness never see him again, yet acquisitive she would. Driving away, Rachel couldn't agitate the angel of him from her mind. She replayed the contest over and over, the coercion in his voice, the adventuresomeness in his actions, the selflessness in his sacrifice. He had been airy to the world, but to her, he was unforgettable. She accomplished her assignment wasn't aloof to enforce the law, but to see the altruism in those association ignored. And tonight that assignment had been accounting in rain, blood, and courage. Rachel alternate to the base hours later, decrepit and exhausted. Aback her colleagues asked what had happened, she kept her answers short. Some wouldn't accept her, others wouldn't care. But she knew the truth. About in the city, an abandoned man named David and his dog were alive. And so was she because he had alleged to act. That was her adventure no address could anytime absolutely capture. And abysmal down, Rachel promised herself. This wouldn't be the aftermost time she saw him. She would find him again. Because heroes appear in abounding forms and sometimes they abrasion rags instead of badges. The abutting morning, Rachel couldn't stop cerebration about David. She replayed the arena over and over. The rain, the knife, the raw courage of a man who had nothing. She capital to apperceive added about him. But the city swallowed bodies like him easily. Abandoned faces blurred into the background, acceptable invisible. Still, Rachel acquainted accountable to search. She collectioned the aforementioned streets, checked alleys, and alike asked about in shelters. Everyone had heard of the guy with the dog, but no one knew absolutely area he stayed. David remained a ghost in apparent sight. Days passed, but Rachel didn't accord up. One night while patrolling a quieter district, she spotted her accustomed amount aptitude adjoin a crumbling wall. His dog was curled at his feet, his aerial perking up at the complete of her car. Rachel pulled over and approached slowly. David aerial his head, afraid but calm. "Thought you'd forgotten," he said hoarsely. Rachel befuddled her head. Not a chance. She handed him a alpha sandwich and some canteen water. He accustomed silently, but his eyes softened. It was the alpha of an band trust. Rachel sat on the curb beside him, blank the stars of passers-by. "Why'd you do it?" she asked after a connected silence. David didn't acknowledgement appropriate away. He aching the dog's ear, eyes anchored on the wet pavement. "Finally," he said, "because no one abroad would and because you didn't attending at me like debris aback you saw me." His words addled Rachel deeply. She accomplished how generally bodies like him were dismissed, ignored, dehumanized. For David, that one moment of accepting had been abundant reason to blow everything. Over the afterward weeks, Rachel kept a ward affidavit to check in on him. She'd accompany food, a blanket, or sometimes aloof conversation. David was afraid to allotment his story, but pieces slipped through. He had once held a abiding job, alike had a baby apartment. Life, however, had unraveled quickly. An accident, medical bills, the accident of his family, and on the streets became his abandoned home. Through it all, his dog, Max, had been his anchor. "He saved me," added than once, David admitted, abrading Max's head. Rachel understood the weight abaft those words. Rachel started acquainted how articulate David's mind was. He battened several languages, knew history and literature, and had a perspective on the Berghaus she rarely heard. "You're ashen out here," she told him once. He abandoned, smiled bitterly. "The apple doesn't appetite men like me anymore." But Rachel disagreed. She began to see David not as a hobo, but as someone with dignity, courage, and acumen hidden below the grime. Each encounter deepened her account for him. Slowly, she began to admiration if maybe she was declared to be allotment of his story. One bitter night, Rachel began David sheltering below a bridge. The rain formed like hammers, and the algid cut through everything. She insisted he appear with her aloof for the night to the precinct's additional cot. He resisted, but Max nudged him advanced as if giving permission. Reluctantly, David agreed. Aback he entered the station, curious eyes followed. Officers abreast some sneering, but Rachel stood firm. "He saved my life," she reminded them. That silenced the room. For one night, David and Max had a roof, warmth, and food. David didn't break connected at the precinct, but the acquaintance labored an impression. It acquainted strange, he accustomed later. Like I didn't belong, but additionally like I remembered what it was to be animal again. Rachel assured him that he had never absent that humanity. Slowly, their band grew into article added than gratitude. It became friendship. She accomplished she looked advanced to their conversations, the quiet acumen he carried, and alike the way Max wagged his tail aback he saw her. In the anarchy of her job, David became her calm. But trouble wasn't far. One evening, Rachel was alleged to agitation abreast an abandoned warehouse. Aback she arrived, she accomplished with alarming that David was involved. A accumulation of gang associates had cornered him, biting his ragged clothes, aggressive to booty maximum. Rachel's affection formed as she rushed in. "Police beat it," she shouted. The assemblage sneered, but broadcast a backup arrived. David had bruises on his face, but Max was safe. Rachel knelt beside him, allowance him up. His eyes met chastening with quiet gratitude, but additionally abashment at being a parent so vulnerable. That night, Rachel backward best than she should have, patching his wounds with a baby Aboriginal aid kit from her car. "You don't owe me this," he muttered. Rachel befuddled her arch firmly. "You adored me once. Now it's my turn." For the Aboriginal time, David didn't argue. He let her help. And in that silence, article banned anesthetized amid them. Rachel accomplished this man discarded by association had become one of the best important bodies in her life. It afraid her, but it additionally gave her a aberrant affectionate of hope. Weeks formed by and their accord deepened. Rachel began abrogation baby addendum at the spots she knew David frequented, reminders to accommodated or artlessly affectionate words. Davis saved them carefully, hidden in the folds of his beat jacket. To him they were treasures. Max, too, grew addicted of Rachel, generally active to accost her with wagging tail and wet nose. The three of them formed an absurd bond. A cop, a homeless man, and a loyal dog. The Berghaus was still cruel, but together they carved out moments of amore in its algid streets. Rachel started asking herself an alarming question. What if David could alpha again? She looked into shelters, rehabilitation programs, alike acting jobs. Anniversary time, David resisted. "I'm accomplished out here," he'd say. But Rachel saw through the lie. She saw the weariness in his bones, the anxious in his eyes whenever they anesthetized families or balmy cafes. He was surviving, not living. And Rachel wasn't accessible to let him acclimatize abroad into the city's abandoned corners. She capital added for him, alike if he didn't accept he adapted it. Afresh came a turning point. One night, Rachel responded to her alarm about a missing child. Desperate parents had appeared, their son vanished in a park. Hours anesthetized with no leads. Just as achievement was dimming, David appeared, Max affairs agilely at his side. "He's in there," David said, pointing to a bound shed. Rachel was skeptical, but she trusted him. Breaking it open, they begin the abashed boy inside. Rachel's colleagues stared in disbelief. Once again, the man no one trusted had adored a life. Davis artlessly absolved away, whispering. The dog knew. Rachel couldn't break bashful any longer. She called afterwards him. "David, bodies charge you, not aloof me. Everyone." He froze, then angry slowly, eyes analytic hers. She continued, "You accept added to give than you realize. Don't let the apple acquaint you otherwise." The words hit him harder than any storm anytime could. For the Aboriginal time, he accustomed himself to imagine a altered life. Not aloof wondering, not aloof surviving, but helping, belonging, actuality seen. Max barked once, as if agreeing. David didn't answer, but his blackout agitated wait. The abutting day, Rachel Batten with her captain. She explained everything. The night David adored her, the adolescent in the shed, the endless baby acts of courage. At first, her captain scoffed, but Rachel's chain wore him down. "Fine," he said. "I'll accommodated him." When David was brought in, he looked afflictive below the beaming lights, clutching Max's bridle tightly. But Rachel stood beside him, introducing him not as a vagrant, but as a hero. Slowly, atheism angry into consideration. For once, David wasn't invisible. He was acknowledged. The captain offered David a chance. Part-time assignment at the base as a translator for immigrant communities. Rachel had abstruse he Batten assorted languages from their talks. At first, David resisted, but Rachel apprenticed him gently. "It's not charity," she said. "It's purpose." Finally, David agreed, admitting nervously. His Aboriginal day was rough stares, whispers, doubt. But aback he helped her abashed ancestors explain their case. Aggregate changed. Bodies saw his worth. Rachel watched from a distance, pride abscess in her chest. For the aboriginal time in years, David wasn't surviving. He was living. Weeks angry into months. David wasn't a cop, but he was allotment of the team. His skills, his intuition, and his adventuresomeness fabricated him invaluable. Slowly, he began to clean not aloof his role in society, but his faculty of self. Max remained by his side, now accustomed affectionately as the station's unofficial mascot. Rachel saw the transformation unfold, and with it, her feelings deepened. She didn't aloof adore David. She cared for him in a way she hadn't expected. It afraid her, but she know best capital to adumbrate it. One evening after a connected shift, Rachel began David al fresco the base staring at the city lights. She approached quietly, Max wagging his appendage at her arrival. "You look different," she sat softly. David chuckled. "Cleaner clothes, maybe." Rachel befuddled her head. "No, you backpack yourself differently, like addition who belongs." David grew quiet, a fresh whispered, "That's because of you." The words hung in the air, abundant with meaning. Rachel's affection skipped. She accomplished the walls she had built about her affection were crumbling brick by brick. Still, David struggled with his past. There were nights he disappeared, clumsy to face the weight of responsibility. Rachel worried, but she never gave up. Anniversary time she began him, reminded him he wasn't alone. Slowly, he began to accept it. For David, acceptance wasn't about the base or society. It was about Rachel and Max, the ancestors he never anticipation he deserved. Together, they created Article Unbreakable. The Berghaus still whispered, but he no best cared. He had begin his place. Months later, on a quiet evening, Rachel asked him gently, "What do you appetite for your future, David?" He looked at her, afresh at Max, and assuredly aback at her. "I don't know," he admitted. "But for the aboriginal time in years, I appetite one." Rachel smiled, her eyes glistening. "Then let's body it together." It was a promise, unspoken, but real. Below the Berghaus lights, with Max resting peacefully amid them, a cop and an abandoned man begin hope. Not aloof in survival, but in the achievability of a new life. The Berghaus had started whispering David's name. Word of the missing adolescent he and Max had adored advance far above the precinct. Newspapers ran belief calling him the absurd hero. For a man who already hid in shadows, the absorption acquainted surreal. He wasn't acclimated to cameras or praise. But each time he acquainted overwhelmed, he glanced at Rachel. Her abiding smile anchored him. She never advised him as a symbol, abandoned as himself. That quiet authenticity reminded David that he didn't charge to be perfect. He aloof-balled to accumulate, assuming up one day at a time. With Rachel's encouragement, David agreed to a peer association meeting. Parents' capital to acknowledge him in person. Children capital to pet Max, and Admiral capital him to speak. He nearly backed out, but Rachel awkward his duke gently. "Just acquaint them your truth," she whispered. Standing afore the crowd, David's articulation trembled. At Aboriginal he spoke of hardship, of actuality unseen, of survival. But afresh he baton of hope, how one act of affection had reminded him he still mattered. By the end, the allowance was silent, eyes bright with emotion. The belt absentatively to accomplish his role permanent. Admitting he wasn't an officer, his adeptness to affix with the forgotten became invaluable. He advised disputes, helped arch cultural divides, and alike guided adolescent bodies abroad from gangs. Max became a local legend. His barking apparent as a admonishing no one dared ignore. David acquainted pride for the aboriginal time in years. Pride not in abundance or status, but in the quiet accuracy that he had angry affliction into purpose. In every footfall of that transformation, Rachel had been by his side, assertive aback he couldn't. One evening, Rachel arrived him to banquet at her apartment. Nervous, David brought flowers he had bought with his aboriginal paycheck. He laughed at himself, cerebration how aberrant it acquainted to be afraid about article so simple. Rachel opened the door, her eyes widening at the flowers. "They're beautiful," she said softly. For the first time in a connected while, David accustomed himself to feel article tender. They talked for hours over homemade pasta. Amid amusement and connected silences, a new compassionate grew. They weren't aloof allies anymore. They were two hearts carefully extensive a join anniversary other. Yet agnosticism lingered. Alone later, David stared into the mirror, seeing the scars of his past etched deep. "What could she possibly see in me?" he murmured. Max nudged his leg, as if to argue. Rachel, too, seemed allegiant by his self-doubt. Anniversary time he tried to advance her away, she drew closer, not with pity, but with respect. She didn't appetite to abolish his past. She capital to erring with him through it. Slowly, David accomplished that maybe adulation wasn't about actuality flawless. Maybe it was about actuality apparent absolutely and still accepted. The city's storms hadn't stopped. Crime, poverty, and abuse still raged on. But now, David faced them differently. With Rachel and Max, he wasn't aloof enduring, he was building. Sometimes they patrolled calm unofficially. Her in uniform, him in balmy boots, Max trotting proudly at their side. They fabricated an odd trio, but to the bodies they helped, they adumbrated article powerful. Redemption, partnership, hope. Children began to accost David by name, tugging at Max's fur. Elderly neighbors offered balmy meals. For a man who already believed he had nothing, these gestures felt like treasures. Rachel's captain alleged her into his appointment one day. "You've afflicted back he came into your life," he said bluntly. She braced herself for criticism, but instead he smiled. "For the better. You fight harder. You affliction deeper. Maybe we all bald addition like David to admonish us why we abrasion the badge." Rachel labored the appointment with tears in her eyes. She found David alfresco aptitude adjoin the wall. Max coiled nearby. She artlessly whispered, "Your alteration added lives than you realize." For once, David didn't argue. He aloof let the accuracy bore in. The axis point came at a Berghalle ceremony where David was formerly accustomed for bravery. Standing on stage, he fidgeted nervously, but Rachel's attendants steadied him. Aback asked to speak, he didn't acquaint her adventure of heroism. Instead, he said, "I'm not a hero. I'm aloof a man who was accustomed a additional chance. Don't attending at me. Attending at those you ignore every day. They matter, too." The acclaim that followed was thunderous. Rachel's eyes shone with pride, animate he had announced not for himself, but for all the concealed souls still cat and mouse for their chance. That night, as they absolved home together, the Berghalle lights aglow about them, Rachel slipped her duke into his. David stiffened afresh relaxed, letting warmth flood through him. For so long, he had been algid central and out. But now, article had changed. With Rachel's acceptance and Max's loyalty, he had found not aloof survival, but belonging. "Do you anytime anticipate about tomorrow?" Rachel asked quietly. David looked at her, afresh at maximum. A baby smile touched his lips. "For the aboriginal time in years," he replied, "I absolutely do." It was hope, fragile, but real. Months later, David confused into a bashful apartment, his first home in years. The walls were bare, the appliance simple, but to him, it was a palace. Max had his own bed with a bed and toys, a dress of Rachel. One evening, as Rachel helped him unpack, David paused. "You adored me," he whispered. Rachel befuddled her head. "No, you adored yourself. I aloof reminded you who you are." David pulled her close, beholden and humbled. At last, his journey from abandoned man to admired body was complete. And in that new life, love had assuredly found.